The massive space station Concordia floated in the darkness between star systems like a glowing jewel. Its crystal-clear viewing ports showed the endless void dotted with distant stars. Inside the main dining hall, beings from across the galaxy sat around a huge circular table made of polished metal that reflected the soft lights above. The peace talks had been going on for 3 days now. Representatives from dozens of alien species filled the room, their translator devices humming softly as they spoke in their native languages. The air smelled of different foods and the strange scents that came from so many different worlds. At one end of the table sat the human delegation. They were smaller than most of the other beings in the room, their pale skin and simple clothes making them look almost plain compared to the colorful scales, fur, and exotic features of their alien neighbors. The humans spoke quietly among themselves, taking notes on their data tablets. Sergeant Marcus Chen stood near the wall behind the human delegates. His job was simple: keep the diplomats safe and stay quiet. He wore the standard blue uniform of the Terran Federation military, with sergeant stripes on his sleeves and a few metal ribbons on his chest. His face showed the marks of someone who had seen combat. A thin scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, and his dark eyes moved constantly around the room, watching for any sign of trouble. The humans had been at war with the Galactic Coalition for 3 years. It had been a bloody conflict that cost millions of lives on both sides. Now finally, both sides were tired of fighting and wanted peace. But trust came slowly between former enemies. The territorial boundaries in the Outer Rim sectors remain under discussion, said Ambassador Wells, the lead human negotiator. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. We believe a neutral zone would serve both our interests. Across the table, Admiral Lisa Veltarin nodded slowly. She was a Catherian, one of the most powerful warrior races in the Coalition. Her blue-gray skin had a metallic shine to it, and her silver hair was pulled back in a tight military style. Forearms emerged from her broad shoulders, each ending in hands with long, sharp fingers. When she spoke, her voice was deep and commanding. The Coalition finds this proposal acceptable, Admiral Veltarin said. However, we must discuss the matter of war reparations. Next to the Admiral sat her daughter, Zara Veltarin. She was younger, maybe 25 in human years, with the same blue-gray skin as her mother, but brighter silver hair that she wore loose around her shoulders. Unlike her mother, who carried herself with the dignity of a seasoned commander, Zara seemed bored and restless. She kept looking around the room with obvious displeasure. Zara's eyes fell on Sergeant Chen standing by the wall. She studied him for a long moment, taking in his scars, his simple uniform, and his serious expression. Then she turned to the young Vorthon delegate sitting beside her. "Look at that human soldier," she whispered, but her voice was loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Do you see how small he is? How weak he looks?" The Vorthon, a tall being with green skin and large black eyes, glanced at Chen and then back at Zara. "I have heard the humans fought well in the war," he said carefully. Zara laughed, a sound like silver bells ringing. "Fought well? They got lucky, nothing more. The humans are primitive creatures who barely know how to hold a weapon properly. Look at him. He probably shakes with fear every time he hears a loud noise." More beings around the table began to notice the conversation. Some turned to look at Chen, who continued to stand at attention, his face showing no emotion even though he could clearly hear every word. "The humans won several major battles," pointed out a delegate from the Christek Empire, her translucent skin glowing softly. "Their tactics were quite effective." "Tricks and deception," Zara said, waving one of her 4 hands dismissively. "Any child could win a fight if they were allowed to cheat. Humans have no honor, no real strength. They are insects compared to the Catherian military." The conversation at the official negotiating table continued, but more and more delegates were listening to Zara's comments. She seemed to enjoy the attention and spoke louder. "I fought human soldiers during the siege of Kepler Station," she continued. "They cried like babies when faced with real warriors. One of them actually begged for mercy before I knocked him unconscious." Pathetic creatures. Chen's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. His orders were clear: protect the diplomats and stay out of political discussions. No matter what anyone said about humans or about him personally, he was not supposed to respond. "Perhaps you underestimate them," said the elderly delegate from the Zephyrian Council. His wrinkled face showed concern. "The war lasted 3 years. Surely that suggests the humans have some capability. 3 years because we were being merciful, Zara replied. We could have crushed them in 3 months if we had truly tried. The coalition leadership wanted to preserve human worlds for colonization, so they held back our full strength. Otherwise, these weak little creatures would have been wiped out completely. Admiral Veltarin had been listening to the main negotiations, but Chen noticed her glance toward her daughter several times. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, but something in her posture suggested she was not pleased with what she was hearing. The humans claim to be warriors, Zara continued, gesturing toward Chen. But look at that one. He stands there like a statue, afraid to even speak. A true warrior would defend his people's honor when it was questioned. But humans have no real honor to defend. Several aliens chuckled at this comment. The sound made Chen's hands tighten into fists behind his back, but still he said nothing. In Cytherian culture, Zara explained to her audience, a warrior who allows his people to be insulted without response is considered a coward. But I suppose humans have different standards, much lower standards. The official negotiations had paused now as most of the room was listening to Zara's speech. Ambassador Wells looked uncomfortable, but he also could not tell a coalition admiral's daughter to be quiet during peace talks. I have heard, said a delegate from the Rigel Confederacy, that human soldiers are quite resilient in combat. Resilient? Zara laughed again. You mean stubborn, like animals too stupid to know when they are beaten? That is not the same as being strong or skilled. A rock is resilient too, but that does not make it a warrior. Chen could feel the eyes of the room on him now. His own people at the negotiating table looked embarrassed and angry, but they were diplomats, not soldiers. They could not respond to military insults any more than he could respond to political ones. Perhaps, Zara said, standing up from her chair, we should ask the human soldier what he thinks. Tell us, little man, do you believe you could face a real Cytherian warrior in combat? Or would you run away crying like your comrades did at Kepler Station? The room fell completely silent. All eyes turned to Chen, who still stood at attention by the wall. For a long moment nobody moved or spoke. Then Admiral Veltarin spoke for the first time since her daughter had begun her speech. Zara, the Admiral said quietly, her voice carrying a warning tone. Perhaps it is time to return to the official discussions. But Zara was enjoying herself too much to stop now. She had the attention of the entire room and she intended to make the most of it. No, Mother, she said. I think it would be educational for everyone to hear what the human has to say about his people's military prowess. Chen remained silent, his dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere above Zara's head. The young Cytherian seemed frustrated by his lack of response and stepped closer to where he stood. You see, she said to the room. He cannot even speak when directly addressed. This is the quality of human soldiers, silent and afraid. Ambassador Wells started to stand up. Perhaps we should focus on the treaty negotiations. No, Zara interrupted, holding up one of her 4 hands. I think this is very relevant to our discussions. How can we negotiate with humans as equals when their own soldiers are too frightened to defend their honor? She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Chen. Even though she was young for a Cytherian, she was still taller than him by almost a foot. Her forearms moved as she spoke, making her appear even larger and more intimidating. I have a proposal, Zara announced to the room. Since the human soldier seems unable to speak for himself, perhaps he would prefer to demonstrate his abilities in a more practical way. Admiral Veltarin's eyes narrowed. Zara, what are you suggesting? The station has training facilities, Zara said with a smile that showed her sharp teeth. Perhaps our human friend would like to show everyone just how capable human soldiers really are. A simple sparring match, nothing dangerous, just enough to prove whether humans deserve to be treated as equals or as the inferior beings they appear to be. The room buzzed with excited whispers. Several delegates leaned forward in their chairs, clearly interested in seeing such a demonstration. Others looked worried about the diplomatic implications. That seems unnecessary, said Ambassador Wells, his voice tight with concern. Sergeant Chen is here for security purposes, not entertainment. Entertainment? Zara laughed. This would be education. How can we make informed decisions about future relations with humanity if we do not understand their true capabilities? She turned back to Chen, who had not moved or changed expression during the entire exchange. What do you say, Sergeant? Are you willing to show these delegates what human soldiers can do, or would you prefer to continue standing there in silence while your species is dismissed as weak and primitive? For the first time since the conversation began, Chen spoke. His voice was quiet but clear. "I am not authorized to participate in unofficial combat demonstrations, ma'am." Zara clapped her hands together, the sound echoing through the quiet room. "There, he admits it. He refuses to fight because he knows he would lose. This is human courage, hiding behind regulations and excuses." "I did not refuse to fight," Chen said calmly. "I said I was not authorized. If my commanding officer gives permission, I will do whatever is required." Ambassador Wells looked very uncomfortable. The peace negotiations were delicate enough, without adding a physical confrontation between a human soldier and a coalition admiral's daughter. But refusing the challenge would make humanity look weak in front of all these alien delegates. The terms would be simple, Zara continued, sensing that she was winning. Hand-to-hand combat only, no weapons. The station's training facility has safety systems that prevent serious injury. We fight until one of us yields or cannot continue. She gestured around the room with her forearms. All of these distinguished delegates can observe and judge for themselves whether humans are truly capable warriors or just clever weaklings who won wars through luck and deception. Admiral Veltarin finally spoke up. "This is not necessary, Zara. The negotiations should continue without such distractions." "But Mother," Zara said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, "think of the educational value. How many times in history have we had the chance to directly compare human and Catherian combat abilities in a controlled environment? The scientific data alone would be valuable." Other delegates began to murmur agreement. The idea of seeing human and alien warriors face each other was clearly appealing to many of them. Several mentioned that it would help them understand both species better for future diplomatic relations. Ambassador Wells realized he was trapped. If he forbade Chen from accepting the challenge, it would confirm everything Zara had said about human cowardice. But if he allowed it and Chen lost badly, it would be even worse for human reputation. "Sergeant Chen," the ambassador said slowly, "the decision is yours, but remember that you represent not just yourself but all of humanity in this room." Chen nodded once. "I understand, sir." He looked directly at Zara for the first time. "I accept your challenge, ma'am. When and where would you like to conduct this demonstration?" Zara's smile grew wider. "Excellent. The station's main training facility can be prepared within an hour. That should give everyone time to finish their meals and gather to observe." She turned to address the room. "I promise you all an educational experience. You will see exactly why the Catherian military has been feared across the galaxy for thousands of years. And you will understand why humans should be grateful that we are offering them peace instead of complete conquest." The next hour passed quickly. Word spread throughout the station about the upcoming demonstration, and soon nearly everyone aboard wanted to watch. The training facility was large, enough to accommodate several hundred observers in elevated seating areas around a central combat floor. The floor itself was made of a special material that could absorb impacts and prevent serious injuries. Force field generators around the edges would stop anyone from falling or being thrown out of the designated combat area. Medical teams stood by, though most expected they would only be needed to help the human after his inevitable defeat. Chen spent the time in quiet preparation. He removed his uniform jacket and stood in his plain gray undershirt and military pants. His boots were standard issue, designed for comfort rather than combat. He did some simple stretching exercises to warm up his muscles. Zara, meanwhile, had changed into a traditional Catherian combat outfit, a form-fitting suit that allowed maximum freedom of movement for all four of her arms. The material was designed to be both flexible and protective. She spent her preparation time showing off for the gathering crowd, demonstrating complex martial arts moves that utilized all four of her limbs in flowing, deadly combinations. "Look at the difference," she called out to the spectators as she performed a spinning kick that ended with 3 simultaneous punches. Catherians have evolved for combat. Forearms, enhanced strength, superior reflexes. What do humans have? 2 weak arms and the ability to make excuses. The crowd laughed and applauded. Many of the alien species had fought alongside Catherians during the war, and had great respect for their combat abilities. Seeing one of them face a human in single combat was like watching a professional athlete compete against a child. Admiral Veltarin entered the facility and took a seat in the front row of the observation area. Her expression was unreadable as she watched her daughter continue to perform for the crowd. Several times she glanced at Chen, who was simply standing quietly in his corner of the combat area. "Are both participants ready?" announced the station's chief of security, a large being from the Gravok species who served as a neutral referee. Zara bounced on her toes and shadowboxed with all four arms. "I have been ready since this weakling accepted my challenge." Chen simply nodded once. "The rules are simple," the referee continued. "Combat continues until one participant yields, becomes unconscious, or is unable to continue. No weapons of any kind are permitted. The safety systems will prevent fatal injuries, but participants fight at their own risk." He looked at both fighters. "Do you both understand and accept these terms?" "Yes," they both answered. "Then take your positions and prepare to begin." The referee raised his hand. "Begin." Zara immediately launched herself forward with incredible speed. Her forearms moved in a blur as she attacked from multiple angles at once. Two hands aimed punches at Chen's head while her other two hands reached for his arms to grapple him. Her legs moved just as fast, trying to sweep his feet out from under him. Chen stepped backward and to the side, avoiding the first flurry of attacks by inches. The crowd gasped as Zara's fists whistled through the air where his head had been moments before. She followed up immediately with another combination attack, her forearms creating a wall of strikes that seemed impossible to escape. But somehow Chen slipped through the gaps. He moved like water, flowing around her attacks without seeming to hurry. When she punched high, he ducked low. When she struck left, he drifted right. He did not try to block her powerful blows directly. Instead, he let them pass by him harmlessly. "Stand still and fight," Zara shouted, frustrated that none of her attacks were connecting. She increased her speed and aggression, throwing combinations that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Chen continued to move backward, circling around the combat area. To many in the crowd, it looked like he was running away from her superior strength and speed. Some of the alien spectators began to laugh and make comments about human cowardice, but Admiral Velteran was not laughing. She watched Chen's movements with the trained eye of a military commander and saw something different. The human was not fleeing randomly. He was mapping the combat space, learning Zara's patterns, studying her techniques. "Why won't you attack?" Zara demanded as she pursued him around the arena. "Are you too afraid to hit back?" Chen did not answer. He continued his defensive movement, occasionally reaching out to deflect one of her strikes with minimal contact. Each time he touched her arm or leg, he seemed to learn something new about her fighting style. Zara's frustration grew. She was faster and stronger than the human, and she had twice as many weapons to attack with. By all logic, she should have defeated him in the first few seconds. But somehow he kept slipping away from her like smoke. "This is pathetic," she called out to the crowd. "The human is so weak he cannot even fight back. He can only run and hide." But Chen was not just running and hiding. He was doing something that no Catherian warrior had ever learned to do in their long military tradition. He was thinking several moves ahead while fighting. Catherians were bred for combat. Their forearms, enhanced strength, and natural aggression made them formidable warriors who could overwhelm most opponents through pure physical superiority. Their military training focused on maximizing these natural advantages through speed and power. Humans, however, had evolved differently. They were not the strongest or fastest predators on their homeworld. Instead, they had survived and thrived through intelligence, adaptability, and endurance. A human could not outrun a horse, but a human could track that horse across hundreds of miles until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Chen had been studying Zara's fighting patterns for 3 full minutes now. He knew that she favored her right arm slightly, that she dropped her guard for a split second after each forearm combination, and that her powerful attacks were beginning to make her breathe harder. Catherians were built for short, intense bursts of combat. Their muscles could generate enormous power, but they burned energy quickly. Humans, on the other hand, could maintain moderate activity for hours or even days without tiring. "Come on," Zara shouted, sweat beginning to show on her blue-gray skin. "Fight me properly." This time Chen did fight back, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of meeting her strength with strength, he did something completely different. As Zara launched another forearmed assault, Chen suddenly dropped to the ground and rolled between her legs. While she spun around to face him, he grabbed a handful of dust from the training room floor and threw it at her eyes. "Cheating," someone in the crowd shouted, but the referee said nothing. There had been no rule against using the environment, and dirt was not a weapon. Zara blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision. In that moment of distraction, Chen finally went on the attack. But his attacks were nothing like the straightforward punches and kicks that Catherians used. Instead, he struck at nerve clusters and pressure points. He used his elbows and knees as well as his fists. He grabbed her wrist and used her own momentum against her, throwing her off balance. When she tried to grapple him with her superior strength, he became slippery and hard to hold, twisting out of her grip in ways that seemed impossible. The crowd fell silent as they watched something they had never seen before. A human fighting like a human instead of trying to copy alien techniques. Chen struck at the back of Zara's knee, causing her leg to buckle. When she stumbled, he was already moving to her blind side. He grabbed her left arm and twisted it behind her back in a joint lock that would have broken the limb if he had applied full pressure. Zara tried to counter with her other 3 arms, but Chen was already gone. He had released her and moved to a new position before she could react. Her superior speed meant nothing if she could not predict where he would be. Impossible, she gasped, spinning around to find him. How are you moving like that? Chen did not answer. He was breathing steadily and calmly while Zara was starting to pant from exertion. Her powerful attacks were draining her energy reserves, while his efficient movements conserved his strength. The crowd began to murmur in confusion. This was not what they had expected to see. The human was not stronger or faster than the Catherian, but somehow he was controlling the fight. Zara charged at him again, all 4 arms reaching out to grab him. But Chen did something that made the entire audience gasp. He ran straight toward her instead of away. At the last second, he dropped into a slide that took him under her arms and between her legs again. As he passed beneath her, he struck upward at a nerve cluster in her lower back. Zara's legs went numb for a moment and she crashed to the ground. She rolled over quickly and tried to get back to her feet, but Chen was already there. He placed 1 foot gently on her throat. Not enough pressure to hurt her, but enough to pin her down. With his hands, he controlled 2 of her 4 arms. The other 2 could not reach him from the angle where he stood. Yield, he said quietly. Never. Zara struggled against his hold, but she could not break free without risking serious injury to her own throat. Chen increased the pressure slightly. You are beaten. There is no shame in acknowledging it. Zara's eyes blazed with fury and humiliation. She had been defeated by a human, a weak, primitive human with only 2 arms and no natural weapons. It was impossible. It was unthinkable, but it was also undeniably true. She started to speak, then stopped. The words would not come. The crowd was completely silent now. Hundreds of alien beings stared down at the combat floor where a human soldier held a Catherian warrior in a submission hold that she could not escape, Admiral. Velteran stood up slowly from her seat in the front row. Her face showed no emotion, but her 4 hands were clenched into tight fists. Admiral Velteran stepped down from the observation area and walked onto the combat floor. Her heavy footsteps echoed in the silent arena as hundreds of beings watched her approach. Chen immediately released his hold on Zara and stepped back, coming to attention as the high-ranking officer drew near. Zara rolled over and pushed herself up to her knees, breathing heavily. Her silver hair was disheveled and her combat suit was dirty from the training room floor. She looked up at her mother with confusion and embarrassment written across her face. Mother, I can explain, Zara began. The human used dirty tactics and silence, Admiral Velteran said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The Admiral walked past her daughter and stopped directly in front of Chen. She studied his face carefully, her silver eyes moving from his scars to his calm expression. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. What is your full name and rank? The Admiral asked. Sergeant Marcus Chen, Terran Federation Marines. Serial number 2847 Delta 9. Chen replied in the crisp tone of a soldier giving a report. How long have you served in the Marines? 12 years, ma'am. And before that? Chen hesitated for just a moment. Terran Patrol Service, ma'am. 4 years. Admiral Velteran nodded slowly. The Terran Patrol Service. They were the ones who operated in the border regions before the war, were they not? Yes, ma'am. The Admiral turned to look at the crowd of spectators. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly throughout the arena. 20 years ago, she began. I was a young commander in the Coalition fleet, much like my daughter is now. I commanded a heavy cruiser called the Infinite Glory, one of the most powerful ships in our Navy. She paused, looking back at Chen. We were on a classified mission in what was then disputed territory. Our intelligence had located a human outpost that was supposedly gathering information about coalition ship movements. My orders were to investigate and, if necessary, eliminate the threat. Zara watched her mother with growing confusion. She had never heard this story before. The mission went wrong, Admiral Veltarin continued. We were ambushed by 3 human patrol ships, small vessels that should have been no match for my cruiser. But they used tactics we had never encountered before. Instead of facing us in direct combat, they used the asteroid field and debris clouds to mask their movements. They struck at our weak points and disappeared before we could return fire effectively. The crowd listened in fascination. This was not the kind of story they had expected to hear after watching the combat demonstration. My ship was critically damaged, the Admiral said. Hull breaches, engine failure, life support failing. We managed to crash land on a small moon, but most of my crew was injured or killed in the impact. I survived along with 6 of my officers, but we were stranded in hostile territory with no hope of rescue. She walked closer to Chen, her eyes never leaving his face. 3 days later, a human patrol found our crash site. 4 soldiers led by a young lieutenant. They could have simply called in an airstrike and eliminated us. We were enemy officers after all, and we had been trying to destroy their outpost. It would have been the logical military decision. Admiral Veltarin's voice became quieter, but in the silence of the arena, everyone could still hear her clearly. Instead, that lieutenant made a different choice. He and his soldiers risked their lives to dig us out of the wreckage. They shared their medical supplies with wounded Catherians who had been trying to kill them hours before. When coalition rescue ships finally arrived, those humans had kept us alive for 6 days in hostile territory. She turned to address the crowd again. That lieutenant was Marcus Chen. A gasp went up from the spectators. Zara's eyes widened in shock as she stared at the human soldier who had just defeated her. But Mother, Zara said, struggling to understand. Why did you never tell me this? Why did you let me believe that humans were weak and cowardly? Admiral Veltarin looked down at her daughter with sadness in her silver eyes. Because I hoped you would learn wisdom on your own, as I had to learn it. I hoped you would see past your prejudices and understand what I understood that day on the moon. She gestured toward Chen. This man had every reason to hate Catherians. We had killed his friends in battle. We had tried to destroy his outpost. We represented everything he had been trained to fight against. But when he found us helpless and wounded, he chose mercy over revenge. He chose to save lives rather than take them. The Admiral's 4 hands moved as she spoke, emphasizing her words. That is when I learned what true strength really means. It is not the ability to kill your enemies. Any animal can do that. True strength is the ability to show mercy when you have the power to destroy. True strength is the wisdom to know when not to fight. She walked over to where Zara still knelt on the training room floor. You mocked this man for standing silent while you insulted him and his people. You called it cowardice, but I know better. He was silent because he is a professional soldier who follows orders. He was silent because he has nothing to prove to children who have never learned what real war means. Admiral Veltarin's voice grew stern. You challenged him to prove human weakness, and instead he showed you human strength. Not the brute force that you expected, but the intelligence to adapt, the patience to study his opponent, and the skill to win without causing unnecessary harm. She looked back at Chen. He could have seriously injured you at several points during that fight. His training includes techniques that could have broken your arms or damaged your spine, but he chose to defeat you without causing permanent harm, just as he chose to save my life 20 years ago when he could have let me die. The arena was completely silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Hundreds of alien beings absorbed this revelation, trying to understand its implications. Zara, Admiral Veltarin said, her voice now carrying the full authority of her rank and position. You have dishonored yourself, your family, and your species with your behavior today. You spoke from ignorance and prejudice, and you have learned nothing from the war that cost so many lives. She pointed at Chen with one of her 4 hands. This man is a hero who saved the lives of his enemies when he could have taken revenge. He is a warrior who defeats his opponents without unnecessary cruelty. He is a professional who maintains his dignity, even when faced with insults and challenges. Admiral Veltarin's voice rose to fill the arena, and you will show him the respect he has earned. She looked down at her daughter with stern authority. On your knees. Zara stared up at her mother in shock. The command hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Around the arena, hundreds of alien beings watched in stunned silence as one of the most powerful military families in the coalition faced a moment of truth. "Mother, you cannot be serious," Zara whispered. "I am a Catherian warrior. We do not kneel to other species." "You are a Catherian child who has forgotten what honor means," Admiral Veltaren replied, her voice cold as space. "And you will learn it now, or you will no longer be my daughter." The threat was real. In Catherian culture, family honor was everything. To be disowned by the family was worse than death. It meant becoming a non-person, someone who no longer existed in society. Zara looked around the arena, seeing the faces of beings from across the galaxy, watching her moment of humiliation. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, but many seemed to be learning something important about both humans and Catherians. Slowly, reluctantly, Zara lowered herself until she was kneeling on both knees before Chen. Her 4 hands rested on her thighs and her head was bowed. It was the traditional Catherian position of respect for a superior warrior. Admiral Veltaren nodded approvingly, then turned to address the crowd. "Let this be a lesson to all of us," she said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the arena. "We have spent 3 years at war because we did not understand each other. We saw differences and assumed they meant weakness. We saw alien ways of fighting and called them cheating or cowardice." She gestured toward Chen, who stood quietly at attention. "But humans do not fight the way we fight because they are not us. They evolved on a different world, facing different challenges. Where we developed overwhelming strength, they developed clever strategies. Where we learned to dominate through force, they learned to survive through adaptation." The Admiral began to pace, her 4 arms moving as she spoke. "During the war, we kept asking ourselves how humans could defeat us in battle after battle. How could these small, weak creatures with only 2 arms stand against the might of the coalition? We assumed they must have some secret weapon, some advanced technology we had not discovered." She stopped and looked directly at Chen. But the truth was simpler and more profound than that. Their secret weapon was being human. Their advantages were not in their bodies or their machines, but in their minds and their spirits. Admiral Veltaren turned back to the crowd. "Humans are persistence hunters. On their homeworld, they evolved to chase prey animals across vast distances until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. They may not be the fastest or strongest, but they never give up. Never." She pointed to the combat floor where the fight had taken place. "You saw this demonstrated today. My daughter was faster and stronger, but the human outlasted her." He studied her patterns, adapted to her style, and used her own aggression against her. When she grew tired from her powerful attacks, he was still fresh and ready to continue. A delegate from the Rigelian Confederacy raised a tentacle. "But Admiral, surely this was just one example. One human against one Catherian proves nothing about their species as a whole." Admiral Veltaren smiled grimly. "You think this was unusual? Let me tell you about the Battle of Proxima 7. Coalition forces outnumbered the human defenders 3-1. We had better weapons, better armor, better ships. The battle should have lasted hours." She paused dramatically. "It lasted 4 months. Every time we thought we had won, the humans adapted. They changed their tactics, found new ways to use their equipment, turned our own strategies against us. When we bombed their supply lines, they learned to live off the land. When we destroyed their communications, they developed new ways to coordinate. When we killed their officers, new leaders emerged from the ranks." The Admiral's voice grew stronger. "They lost that battle eventually, but they made us pay such a price for victory that we never attempted another assault of that magnitude. One human planet tied up an entire coalition fleet for months and inflicted casualties that took us years to replace." She looked around the arena at the alien delegates. "That is the true nature of humanity. They do not win through superior force. They win by refusing to lose. They take whatever you throw at them and find a way to use it as a weapon against you." Ambassador Wells, who had been watching from the diplomatic section, stood up. "Admiral, your words are generous, but many of your people still see humans as inferior beings who got lucky in war." "Then they are fools," Admiral Veltaren replied bluntly, "and dangerous fools because underestimating humanity is a mistake that costs lives and worlds." She gestured toward her daughter, still kneeling before Chen. "Zara made that mistake today. She saw a human soldier and assumed he would be weak, cowardly, primitive. She thought his silence meant fear instead of discipline. She thought his patience meant weakness instead of wisdom." The Admiral's voice softened slightly. I made the same mistake 20 years ago. I thought human tactics were dishonorable because they were different from ours. I thought their strategy was cowardice because they refused to fight the way we expected them to fight. She walked over to Chen and stood beside him. But this man taught me something that day on the moon. He taught me that true honor is not about following the rules of combat. True honor is about making the right choice when nobody is watching, and nothing forces you to do it except your own conscience. Admiral Velteran looked down at her daughter. Zara, what did you learn today? Zara raised her head slowly, tears of shame and understanding in her silver eyes. I learned that I am ignorant and arrogant. I learned that strength has many forms, and I have only understood the most obvious one. I learned that the human warrior has more honor in his silence than I have in all my boasting. She looked up at Chen, who had remained at attention throughout the entire exchange. Sergeant Chen, I apologize for my words and my behavior. I spoke from prejudice and ignorance, and I challenged you not to learn truth but to feed my own pride. Chen's expression softened slightly. Apology accepted, ma'am. We all have much to learn about each other. For the first time, he broke his military posture and extended his hand toward Zara. Would you like me to help you up? Zara stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then reached up with one of her 4 hands to accept his assistance. Chen pulled her to her feet with the same gentle strength he had shown during their fight. Thank you, she said quietly, for the lesson and for the mercy. Admiral Velteran watched this exchange with satisfaction. This is why the peace negotiations matter, she announced to the crowd. Not because we are tired of war, but because we have finally begun to understand what we were fighting. We were not fighting humans, we were fighting our own ignorance about what humanity means. She addressed the alien delegates directly. Some of you represent species that are considering alliance with the coalition. Others represent worlds that have remained neutral during the conflict. All of you are now deciding what kind of relationship you want with humanity going forward. Her forearms spread wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire arena. Let me give you some advice based on hard experience. Do not underestimate them. Do not assume their differences make them inferior. And most importantly, do not mistake their mercy for weakness. Admiral Velteran's voice grew stern. Humanity did not seek this war, but they fought it with determination that surprised us all. They did not want to defeat us, but they proved they could when necessary. Now they offer us peace not because they fear us, but because they choose cooperation over conflict. She looked around the arena one final time. The choice is ours. We can continue to see differences as threats, or we can learn to see them as strengths that make both our species better together than apart. The arena remained silent for a long moment, as hundreds of beings absorbed the implications of what they had witnessed. Then slowly one delegate began to applaud. Others joined in, until the sound echoed throughout the facility. Chen remained at attention, but Admiral Velteran could see the slight smile that touched the corners of his mouth. Zara stood beside him, no longer the arrogant young warrior who had started the day, but a wiser being who had learned something valuable about both herself and the universe around her. The peace negotiations would continue, but now they would proceed with a better understanding of what peace between humans and aliens could really mean.